Welcoming you, Gooshbagz, to the Week 3 edition of the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League podcast. I am your host, the commissioner of the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League, and, of course, the reigning champion, Jason Peck. It's going to be a great week this week because, well, I'm by myself. Unfortunately, we don't have Adam Stovall here yet. Fortunately, later in the episode, we have a surprise call-in. I guess it's not a surprise anymore, but Adam is going to call in to help me talk about the matchups for next week. We couldn't get him on for the beginning. It was kind of a last-minute thing that we were able to get him on for the matchups. So I'm glad I'll be able to talk to him for a little bit. It's my fault that I couldn't get you on earlier or do it yesterday or earlier today or later this week. I was kind of trying to get it out before the next week of football. So I just wanted to get it done and get it over with and continue on with our fantasy football matchups. So on to the big news in the NFL. We have some injuries this week yet again. Fortunately, it's not as bad as previous weeks, but let's start off with Dallas Goedert. Unfortunately, he had a broken ankle this week. I'm not quite sure how long he's going to be out. Obviously it's a broken ankle, so it's a long-term absence. It might be 4 to 6 weeks, but we're not too sure about that. In the meantime, Zach Ertz is going to be a great fantasy option for you. Let's see. Chris Carson had a sprained knee. He had, he came out of the game early. They said it's going to be maybe 1 to 2 weeks. Apparently it's a mild knee sprain, so he's not going to be gone too long. I think he practiced today, so he's looking good for maybe not this week, but next week for sure. Jordan Reed is kind of the nature of the beast with Jordan Reed. He's got another injury. He has countless lines of injuries in his his football career. He's on the 3-week injured reserve for his knee sprain, and who knows, it might be longer with Jordan Reed. Deontay Johnson got knocked out early with a concussion, and so did Russell Gage. We'll see if they'll be able to play this week. Although Deontay Johnson and the Steelers are playing against the Tennessee Titans this week. And the Tennessee Titans, big news, they had 8 cases of COVID on their team. So 3 players, and I think an additional player today, actually. So 4 players and 5 personnel got tested positive for COVID. So the league is still dealing with that. They're trying to figure out what's going to happen, when they're going to play the game between Pittsburgh and Tennessee, and whether or not they're going to play it this week. So it might be Monday, it might be Tuesday. That's the latest news. Or they might make this the bye week for the Titans and the Steelers and move that off to the next week, or move that off to their bye weeks. So that's all a possibility. The Titans played against Minnesota last week, and fortunately nobody yet from Minnesota has tested positive for COVID. So I think their game will still be on pending future COVID tests, assuming nobody gets it on their team. So keep an eye on that. The Houston Texans versus the Vikings might also have potential setbacks. Sad news for Tariq Cohen. He got a torn ACL this week, so he's out for the year. That really sucks. He looked really good the last couple games. He's been a great he doesn't just kind of sub in for – he's a good gadget guy, so he's playing a lot more snaps than just the ones that David Montgomery isn't. So Tariq Cohen has been great. Unfortunately, he had an ACL tear, joining a bunch of ACL tears this year, which sucks. Chris Godwin also came out early with a hamstring injury. It sounds like he may be out a week or two. They're not quite sure at this point. I believe. I don't think he was put on IR or anything. He might just be out for a week or two. Anyway, moving on to more fun news. The feast mode this week was the top scorer in the league. That's my team. We put up 142.58 fantasy points. My running backs dominated this week, and it led my team to stardom, as well as my defense and tight end. So let's move on to that matchup. Matchup number 1 was Feast Mode versus Adams, the Breeze Knees. So Feast Mode won 142.58. Obviously, we won to 127.12 fantasy points. Like I said, my Indianapolis Colts defense and special teams once again leads me to victory as Feast Mode dominates in this matchup. So I don't know if you guys recall back to last year, maybe week 16. I think that was the championship game. I really wanted the Denver's defense that week, and Benaya, my opponent, picked them up. And I was very mad about that. And I ended up just grabbing, just whoever I could find off of waiver wires. I happened to see Indianapolis Colts, who has a decent defense, and I think they had a pretty good matchup. I don't remember who they were playing, but I do remember Nyheim Hines had 2 punt return touchdowns. Now, that didn't quite happen this week, although they did have 1 touchdown, I believe, and they just monstered up some oh, no, I'm wrong. They also scored 2 touchdowns. So they had 2 defensive touchdowns, I believe. They only allowed 7 points, and they had 3 interceptions, so that was fantastic. So they saved the day and led me to victory. But I couldn't just have the Indianapolis Colts defense lead me to victory. To score 142.58 points, I also need other people. I have James Robinson, who put up 27.9 fantasy points. And like I say a little bit later in the show, James Robinson has been huge for me this year. I'm so glad that I just grabbed him last minute, and he's been a monster, and I hope he continues to be a monster. Even though the Jaguars looked awful, he still put up 27.9 fantasy points. So I have high hopes that even in a good game script where, their offense is doing well, James Robinson is still going to do well. So he's one bright spot on their offense right now. I also had Dalvin Cook with 24.9 fantasy points. He put up a great week. He had almost 200 yards from scrimmage. I think it was 185 yards and a touchdown. I think he had a fumble as well. But he was fantastic, and he's going to be a great starter for me going forward, as it should be because he was my keeper this year. I also had Keenan Allen, who had 23.7 fantasy points, and it was, unfortunately, for Tyrod Taylor, it was great that Justin Herbert started this game. For me, it was great that Justin Herbert started the game because Keenan Allen has a great rapport with him, whereas Mike Williams seemed to have a better time with Tyrod Taylor. So I think Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen connection is going to get me some big fantasy points this year, and I'm super stoked. My duds on the week. So number 1 was Cam Newton, unfortunately. He had 11.18 fantasy points, which is not what you're looking for from a quarterback in fantasy football. So I was super sad about that. Hopefully he kind of steps it up again next week. He really didn't look like himself, and they didn't really need him too much in this last game. So they kind of dominated without needing the passing game. So Cam Newton will bounce back this week. We also got Deontay Johnson, who, like I said earlier, got knocked out with a concussion early in the game. So he only had 0.9 fantasy points. Didn't really help me win, but I can't really fault him for that because, he got injured. So team 2, the Breeze Knees. Now, he had some fantastic players this week. He had Tyler Lockett, who was connected to that amazing Russell Wilson game. Tyler Lockett put up 32.5 fantasy points. He also had Drew Brees putting on a show against the Packers this week. He had 23.52 fantasy points, and I think 95% of that came on passes, or maybe more than 95%, came on passes within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. Wow, I cannot think. It came within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. He just kept throwing little dinkers to Alvin Kamara, and that's why Alvin Kamara had a fantastic day. I think it was mostly because Michael Thomas was out, so that really lent itself to Drew Brees and Alvin Kamara day for sure. He also had Mike Davis, who was a spot start this week. He spent plenty of money on him. He spent $45 on Mike Davis, or $35. I don't know. I said it wrong last week. Yeah, I think it's 45. He spent 45 on Mike Davis, and it did him well. He got 19.1 fantasy points, but it wasn't quite enough to take down Feast Mode. He also had Jarvis Landry in the dud category this week with 5.6 fantasy points. That's not great, but Jarvis Landry was putting up some solid numbers last year, and you're looking for a little bit more than that from him. On to matchup number 2. We have Big Ben's Bathtub, which is now no longer Big Ben's Bathtub, versus my tight end Ertz and Eifert. So Big Ben's Bathtub, which is Andrew Kortz's team, I have to clarify that every week because we never know what his team name is going to be. So Big Ben's Bathroom unfortunately lost to my tight end Ertz when I fart. 113.38 fantasy points to 124.86 fantasy points. Now Aaron's team, I was just talking to him the other day. Aaron's team looks fantastic, but he just got so unlucky the first couple of weeks. I think he's 1-2 now. But he's got a great team. He always seems to draft really well, and I'm always jealous of his team after the draft, but then he never touches it the rest of the year. So I think that kind of evens out. You know, some people get hurt. He doesn't really pick up anybody. He doesn't really do much. But you know what? That's okay. He still puts up some competitive games. Like this week, his studs were led by Derrick Henry, finally putting up a good week with 26 fantasy points. He also had DK Metcalf with 17 fantasy points. So DK has been kind of the 1B behind Tyler Lockett. So he's been joining in. And he's been kind of like, I feel like they switched roles this year. DK Metcalf, I feel like last year was more of like a possession type receiver, and Tyler Lockett was the downfield threat. And I think they swapped roles this year. DK Metcalf has been having some huge games based on some monster like targets down the field, and I think Tyler Lockett has been more the consistent wide receiver with the huge upside. So he's been getting the more targets, the more the more yards, the more touchdowns in general. But DK Metcalf has been close behind, and he's always got a chance to put up a boom week. In the duds category for my tight end Ertz, Brandon Cooks with 3.8 fantasy points, and it's really tough to trust Brandon Cooks in those first 3 weeks because he was against really good matchups. They were playing against the Steelers. That's the only one that comes to mind. But I remember, they have one of the toughest first 3 games. Oh, they played against the Ravens in week 1. Or no, Chiefs. Sorry, Chiefs week 1, Pittsburgh, and I don't know the third one. But he's had some really tough matchups. Same with Deshaun Watson. I think obviously their offensive line is not great. So when there's a good defense on the other side of that ball, it makes it really tough for the Texans to do much. But Brandon Cooks, not a great game for my tight end. Big Ben's Bathtub, the only stud on his team really that had a big game was Michael Gallup with 22.8 fantasy points. So he had a great game. It's always kind of a toss-up whether or not Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb. This week it was Cedric Wilson, is that his name? Wilson, who nobody's ever heard of before. Yes, it's Cedric Wilson. He had a fantastic game with like 2 touchdowns and like hella yards. So it's always tough to know who's going to go off in Dallas, but somebody is going to go off because Dallas's defense is not good. They're giving up points, so that means they got to put points on the board. So it's always kind of a toss-up whether or not Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, Cedric Wilson, or Amari Cooper is going to have a good game. So who knows? Maybe he's a good start next week. Maybe he's not. But on the duds category, we have maybe Odell Beckham Jr. He had 7.9 fantasy points, so that's pretty good from the worst scorer on your team. He didn't really have too many bad games, just a bunch of like 10-ish point games, and that didn't quite add up to that to beat my tight end Ertz. On to matchup number 3. We have Good Juju versus vszorla that never hits you. So Good Juju took down a measly-looking vszorla that never hits you, 109.6 fantasy points to 83.42 fantasy points. Now, the studs on Good Juju. Like I mentioned before, Alvin Kamara had a huge game, catching all the passes within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. He had 38.2 fantasy points against Green Bay. He also had Kyler Murray putting up 21.7 fantasy points. Kyler Murray has been solid this year. He's got a great floor and a decent ceiling when he puts up some good games. So he's definitely a solid quarterback starter. And they also got DeAndre Hopkins with 18.7 fantasy points. So some great games from those guys. So on the duds side, he had some good games, he had some duds this week. He had Mark Andrews, who's been relatively disappointing this year at 3.7 fantasy points. He had Julian Edelman, who I think just because Cam had a bad week, and, they leaned a lot on the running game in New England. Julian Edelman only had 3.2 fantasy points. And Minnesota's defense, which for some reason Ryo just keeps playing, even though they're atrocious. I don't think they've scored in the positives yet. They had -9 in week 2. So, or maybe week 1. I don't know. Minnesota's D is atrocious. I don't know. They're literally giving you a handicap. They're giving you negative points. So you'd be better off not playing defense than playing Minnesota's defense every week. So figure it out. On to Zerlina never hit you studs. The only one I could come up with was Aaron Rodgers. He had 24.52 fantasy points. Unfortunately, he had more in the studs category than in the duds category than the studs category this week. He had Jared Cook with 3.1 fantasy points, who is kind of a touchdown or bust sort of deal. He had Marquise Brown, who has been very disappointing this year with 2.3 fantasy points. And he had Russell Gage, who unfortunately got knocked out. Still scored more than Marquise Brown and Jared Cook in a full game. But Russell Gage got 3.6 fantasy points. Now, I have to apologize to you, Benaya. I feel bad because I suggested that you should keep Kenyon Drake this year because I thought he was going to be a beast. I thought he was going to be like top 10 for sure, top 5 potentially. The way he played at the second half of the year last year, you were debating between Derrick Henry and Kenyon Drake. And Kenyon Drake came in like the 5th round or something, 6th round. You can get him for crazy cheap. So I thought he was for sure worth it. Now, he hasn't been awful, but he's put up 13.5, 10.5, and 8.4 fantasy points. Not what you're hoping for with your running back 1 on your roster. So I apologize. You're off to a rough start because of that and because of the Julio Jones and Devontae Adams injuries. It's been a rough start, but I promise you, they're all going to turn it around, and you're going to do great, great things coming up. I promise you, and I'm sorry. On to matchup number 4. We have Big Ben's Bathroom, the OG Big Ben's Bathroom versus the Running Mayfields. So Big Ben's Bathroom took the L this week against Running Mayfields. It was 123.88 fantasy points to 137.7 fantasy points. Now, the Running Mayfields, they were my competition this week for the top scoring team. We were both going into the last game. I was down a few points, but I had Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Running Mayfields just had Harrison Butker, and Harrison Butker might be I don't know. I was trying to think of something clever, but he should not be on your fantasy team anymore. He should not be on the Chiefs anymore. He missed like 3 field goals last week. So I don't know, man. I don't know if I have trust in Harrison Butker anymore. Maybe he just had an off week and he'll come back solid in the future, but you never know. Anyway, the studs on the Running Mayfields. We have Russell Wilson, who put up a monster game, 36.8 fantasy points. He had another 5 touchdowns. I actually heard today that Russell Wilson is on pace for 75 touchdown passes this year. Think about that, 75. People barely reach 50. That's a fantastic season, like Hall of Fame season, 50 touchdowns. Like Patrick Mahomes had 50 touchdowns. Peyton Manning had 50 touchdowns. Like not many more than that have hit 50 touchdowns. So Russell Wilson's on pace for 75. That's insane. And with their defense that bad, they might have to keep up throwing them touchdowns. So Russell's going to continue cooking. He had Austin Eckler, who had a fantastic week this week at 25.8 fantasy points. It also helps that they played Carolina, I think. So that's a super easy matchup for running backs. So he had a great day. And then Nick Chubb has been a beast this year. He had 23.5 fantasy points. So he has some solid top 3 guys on his fantasy team. I kind of was doubting it at the beginning of the year, but he's had a fantastic start to the year. In the duds category for the Running Mayfields, he had A.J. Green with 6.1 fantasy points. it almost seems like Tyler Boyd has kind of taken over that wide receiver one category for the Bengals. So I don't know. AJ Green's kind of a toss. He's gotten a lot of targets recently, but he really hasn't done a lot with them. So we'll see how AJ Green is going forward. Anyway, on to Big Ben's bathroom. The studs on Big Ben's bathroom. He had Dak Prescott, who's been having a great start to the season. He had 27.48 fantasy points. Allen Robinson stepped up in a big way for Nick Foles. He had 23.3 fantasy points when Nick Foles came in. That was it. Lights out. Allen Robinson's a beast. He also had Tampa Bay's defense and special teams putting up 19 fantasy points for him this week. That's what I'm talking about. They're looking good. They got a good defense down in Tampa Bay, so they're definitely one to keep an eye on. In the duds category, we have Evan Ingram with 3.7 fantasy points. We have Joshua Kelly with a surprising 4.2 fantasy points. I thought he was going to be better. Like I said, the Chargers were playing against Carolina this week, and they are a fantastic matchup for running backs, and he's been doing great recently. So I'm surprised that Joshua Kelly didn't do more. And they also have Melvin Gordon with 5.8 fantasy points. So that is unfortunate. You had some studs, so you can't really be too disappointed. You had 120, almost 124 fantasy points. So unfortunately, you were played against the second highest scorer of the week. So not much you can do about that. On to the last matchup for this week. We have Mix and Mac versus Terror Squad. Now lean back. So this is James's new fantasy football team name. He chose Terror Squad, hashtag now lean back. No, there's no hashtag, but I just added it. Anyway, he won 127.1 fantasy points to 89.08 fantasy points. Now the studs on this team, let me tell you something about Patrick Mahomes. He's looking like the Patrick Mahomes of 2018, coming back with some hot passes and some great plays. He's looking like a fantastic offensive genius this year. He had 40 fantasy points, so he's putting up monster games even against a tough Baltimore defense. But everybody else in his team was just kind of average. Nobody putting up huge games, nobody putting up bad games. His worst game was T.Y. Hilton with 6.7 fantasy points. So can't be too angry about that. I mean, he won, so he can't be angry at all. Now, on the other hand, Mix and Mac had a rough week this week. It may be due to the auto picking of his team, or that's probably it, the auto pick. He had James Conner in the studs category, who has continued to be great while he's been healthy. He has 22.9 fantasy points, coming back from the dead last year. He had a rough last year, continuing his 2018 season here in 2020. In the duds category, we had MVS with 1.0 fantasy points. Marquez Valdez-Scantling for the Packers. Unfortunately, he did not join in on that feast that we had on Monday night. Darren Waller had 1.9 fantasy points, a tough matchup, but I think they played the Patriots this last week, and they're really good at shutting down the number one. So they shut down Darren Waller. I expect him to have a bounce back next week. We also have Buffalo defense and special teams coming up. Coming up big with 0 fantasy points. All this talking is not good for my voice. All right. So, unfortunately, Mix and Mac needs a big bounce back this week. So, we'll see in our matchup predictions if we predict him to win this week. Anyway, moving on to the waiver wire team, the top waiver wire team this week. QB starting on this waiver wire team is Jared Goff with 27.24 fantasy points. He's been looking pretty good the last couple weeks. He's heating up 2 weeks in a row with pretty good numbers. We have running back one, surprise, Rex Burkhead, 31.3 fantasy points. He was kind of filling in for James White. They had a big week against the Raiders. So I don't think the Raiders defense is that fantastic. Rex Burkhead put up some huge points. It was mostly a ground game because the running back two is Sony Michel with 15.0 points. So obviously the ground game for the New England Patriots was working very well this week. The wide receiver 1 was a big Justin Jefferson with 27 fantasy points breaking out of nowhere. The rookie coming in and being the 1B to Adam Thielen this week up in Minnesota. Justin Jefferson had a massive week. I think he only had 1 touchdown, but he had a bunch of yards, like hella yards. We also have another surprise. Wide receiver 2 on this waiver wire team is Cedric Wilson, who I had never heard of before, but somehow Dallas sprouted a new player that can play just as well as the old ones. Cedric Wilson. So he's added into the mix now with CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper. Like, who knows who's going to have a good week this week. So, yeah, I mean, could be him next week. Who knows? Or it could go back to Gallup. So the tight end on this waiver wire team is Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Grandpa. That's what I'm going to call him because he's old. He had 21.0 fantasy points. Great week once Nick Foles came in. Yeah, actually, he had a touchdown with Mitch Trubisky as well. So he had 2 touchdowns this week, one with Nick Foles, one with Mitch Trubisky. He looked good this week, but who knows if you can trust him on a week-in, week-out basis. In the flex position, we have Brandon Ayuk with 18.6 fantasy points. He's a wide receiver for the 49ers. He's a rookie this year. They were talking him up, and they have no other wide receiver options in San Francisco. So everybody's hurt. They might get Deebo Samuel back, but otherwise everybody else is hurt. So Brandon Ayuk might be a good play for a few weeks. We have in the defense slot, we have the Dolphins with 11 fantasy points. And in the kicker, we have Steven Gostkowski with 25 fantasy points. So that is a massive week for a kicker. Overall, this team put up 201.34 fantasy points. That definitely qualifies as a win for the waiver wire this week. The waivers are 2-1 this year, so tied with everybody at the top of my division. So, yeah. And like I said earlier, we have a not-so-surprising segment here that we're gonna transition to. I talked to Adam a little bit earlier. I was able to get in the matchup predictions with him. So here is me and Adam talking about the matchup predictions. Enjoy. Hey, I got Adam here. Finally got a hold of him. So at least we got him in for part of the podcast this week. Unfortunately, it was my fault that we could not get the podcast going this week because I was I wasn't very flexible with my timeline this week. So that's my fault. I wanted to get this out before football started this weekend. So, Adam, how are you doing?
I am doing very good. Thank you for asking. How is Jason tonight?
I'm doing great, especially off of that beatdown I put on your team this week.
Oh, I forgot about that. I already put it out of my memory.
You put it on your memory already?
Yeah, it's brutal. It was brutal.
It was brutal because my team is amazing. So,
well, I mean, I was going to pick up the same defense you picked up, but I wasn't planning on dropping more than $80 last week.
Yeah.
I spent the $45 on the backup running back and $35 on the guy who was already taking my Chad this week. So $100 is kind of brutal. So I didn't put any money on the Colts defense. I should have.
Yeah. Well, they got me 27 points.
Swing.
Yeah.
That would have had me win there. So.
Oh, for sure. You would have definitely won if you had the Colts D. But
now I'm a little gun shy and spending too much money and everything.
Oh no, I mean you were planning on. I mean you spent 45 and then you said what was it 35 on the other one you were going to?
Yeah. Devonta Freeman.
Yeah, so I mean that's not really being gun shy for sure, but spending money on a defense is always tough. It's always a tough thing to do.
Gun shy not on spending, gun shy on not spending anything.
Oh yeah, well you definitely not gun shy on not spending anything. Did you end with a lot of fab last year?
Huh?
Did you end with a lot of free agent budget last year?
I think I had like half my budget still, honestly.
Ah, yeah, you gotta spend that, my man.
Now I've already blown through half of it in the first quarter of the season. So.
Yeah, I don't think we gotta worry about you spending it all. But all right, well, we got you on here for the matchup predictions. So last week, Neil and I tied we both got 4 out of the 5. So We'll see how we do this week. I'm glad we got Adam on, so at least we can have this portion of the podcast, and I can kind of match myself up against you. If not during the week, then at least for these matchup predictions. So the first matchup I am looking at, what the heck? Wait a minute. This is last week's. No, I got the wrong one up. No. Matchup 1. Oh my goodness, what was I looking at? I got the wrong matchup up. Who am I playing this week? Adam?
Hold up, I'll get you here. You are playing good Juju.
That's right. I do. Oh, you know what? I have them all, except I have your name instead of. All right. I just forgot to change the name for my matchup. So I have them all. All right. I am playing Feast Mode versus Good Juju, which is Ryo's team. So I'll tell you who I am first to give you some time to look through the matchup. I obviously have picked myself. My team is only picking up steam. I know that Good Juju has a great lineup, but I think that Keenan Allen is breaking out with Justin Herbert as his quarterback, so he's picking up steam. I got James Robinson, who's playing against Cincinnati's defense this week. I got some good matchups this week. Robert Woods is playing the Giants. I think I've got a lock for the win this week. What do you think?
As stacked as good Juju is, I think his wide receiver 2, his tight end, and his flex are going to hurt him this week.
Yeah. We've been really concerned about Mark Andrews. People thought he was going to break out quite a bit this year, but he really hasn't done too much.
Well, he broke out last year pretty much. He's been a dud this year, though.
Yeah.
You got George Kittle back in the tight end spot, though.
That's true. I know. Yeah, he practiced in full today, so he should be good to go this weekend.
James Robinson looked really good last week, unfortunately, against me. He's been running the ball well and scoring a lot of touchdowns that way.
He has been.
And your receivers are still pretty studly, so I actually favor you in this matchup this week.
All right, that's what I like to hear. At least we can be together on this one, but all the rest of them, we got to have some difference so we don't tie like I did with Neil last week. So, all right, on to matchup number 2. For my second matchup, I have Big Ben's Bathroom versus my tight end Ertz when I fart. So I picked, mainly because we're not quite sure what's going on in the running back position for my tight end Ertz. He's got Derrick Henry, but we'll have to see if that game is even played this week. We're not quite sure. It might be postponed to Monday or Tuesday, but it also might be pushed off to another week. So we don't even know if that's going to be played. He's got nothing in his running back 2 spot right now. Chris Carson is hurt. So I don't think he has the running backs to really put up a fight this week against Big Ben's Bathroom.
I bet he can still beat Chad's team without
think
the
so?
running back 2.
You think because of he's got Deshaun Watson, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Travis Kelce, that'll kind of put him over the top?
It's going to be Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Kelce.
Yeah.
Not much Watson. Watson's kind of been a dud this year too.
Yeah, he also had really tough games, and he's going against Minnesota this week, who their secondary has sucked. So I think Watson will actually put up a good week.
And Derrick Henry had a good game last week for the first good game of the season. Plays a tough matchup against Pittsburgh, who only allowed 6 yards to Saquon Barkley.
Right.
But I think he'll get more than 6 yards. Tennessee's been pretty good throwing the ball in the play action too. So I think they'll be set up in the goal line, scoring some touchdowns with the running back there, Derrick Henry.
Yeah, no, that's a possibility. If the game is played, I think Derrick Henry will still have a passable week. I don't think it'll be his best week, but he's Derrick Henry. He'll put up, okay numbers no matter what. So who do you officially have winning this matchup then? My tight end Ertz?
Well, I take him with an incomplete roster, so I'll take him with a full roster too.
All right, sounds good. So you got my tight end Ertz. I picked Big Ben's Bathroom. So there's a difference. So that is good. That is good. We need difference in order for me to beat you this week.
Great minds think alike.
That's true. So, all right, the next matchup is most likely won't win versus Mix and Mac. So most likely won't win is Andrew's team, who changes his team name every week. So it's always fun to see what he comes up with. This week I have most likely won't win. Actually, most likely winning this matchup because he's got Josh Allen at his head. I think he's got Miles Sanders is still going to put up a good week. Odell Beckham had a good week last week, so we can see if he can keep performing. And then DJ Moore, Mike Gesicki. I don't necessarily think that this has like a massive upside, his lineup, but he does have Josh Allen, who's going to give him a great week, I'm sure. Like Josh Allen has been over 30 points all year. And I don't think Lamar Jackson's been playing well, and Washington's defense is surprisingly better than you think. I just don't think that Mix and Mac has the depth to take out most likely won't win.
I actually disagree with you. I do like Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. I did want them in the draft, but did not get them. But I think that OBJ will have a tough week. I think McKinnon will have a tough week. Sanders won't do well. DJ Moore won't thrive. So I think that Mix and Mac will take the win this week.
All right.
Because Lamar Jackson will have a bounce back week. I think Conner will be a stud this week. Cooper Kupp will have a decent game. And I think that Lazard, with Aaron Rodgers throwing to him, will continue the same effort he had last week, as well as the fact that Darren Waller will have a big game for now new Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah. No, I mean, Darren Waller's definitely set for a bounce back this week. He didn't have a great week last week. And Alan Lazard is playing against Atlanta, which is a great matchup. But in the defense of most likely won't win, Odell Beckham is against Dallas, who has been just as bad as Atlanta defensively. And I think that Odell Beckham will be able to put up some points. So we'll see. I think this will be a closer matchup than it looks on paper right now. Andrew is projected to win by like 15, but I don't think by 13, I guess. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be closer than that. So on to matchup number 4. We have Zerline, I Never Hit You versus Running Mayfields. So I personally have picked Zerline, I Never Hit You because like you said, Aaron Rodgers against Atlanta, they're going to put up a huge game. So Aaron Rodgers is going to lead the way. Kenyon Drake is finally going to have a great game because he's against Carolina, which is the worst defense in the league. David Montgomery might have a tough time against Indianapolis, but Julio Jones and Devontae Adams are playing against each other in the same game. And both teams are going to put up hella points, I think. So I think that game is going to be a shootout, and Benaya's got pieces of it all over the place. I know the running Mayfields, they got Russell Wilson, you got Nick Chubb, you got Mike Evans, but I don't think that they'll be able to overcome the great matchups that Zerline, I Never Hit You has this week.
I disagree again. I think that Zerline will lose. He's got 3 receiving options to rushing.
Yeah.
Big on Kenyon Drake. Devontae Parker hasn't done much either. I look over at Brandon's team. Russell Wilson's a champ, playing well the whole year. Eckler's been a great number 1 running back option for them. Chubb has been eating up everything in weeks 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Evans is on point now with Tom Brady.
Mike Evans, let me point this out. Mike Evans, in week 1 and week 3, he has a total of 3 yards.
Oh, really?
But he also has 3 touchdowns. Or maybe 4 yards. He had a 2-yard touchdown. He had a 2-yard touchdown week 1, and he had 2 1-yard touchdowns last week.
Yeah, he's got 4 touchdowns so far.
Yeah, but 3 of them were under 2 yards and under.
That's very efficient.
Very efficient, but I don't know if I trust his he's not going to score every week, I don't think.
He could fall down and gain more yards.
I know, that's what I'm saying. So that kind of scares me a little bit. I don't think, sure, he's got a floor because he scored a few touchdowns, but I don't think that's a consistent floor. Anyways, go ahead.
Well, I think I'm going to stick to the running Mayfields.
All right. I am actually very, very adamant about Zerlina never hit you. I think this is going to be a runaway victory for him. So Devontae Parker is playing against Seattle. So if there's any time where he's going to break out, it's Seattle's defense. So they are also an awful defense right now. They've been letting points left and right. So I think that, like I said, Zerlina never hit you. A great matchup. So, but you have the running Mayfields. We are either going to be like I'm going to get them all right, or you're going to get them all right, or we're going to be right in the middle. It's going to be crazy this week. So we got one more this week, and for you, the most important matchup of the week, we have the Breeze Knees versus a new name, Terror Squad. Now lean back, which is James's team. So you're playing against James this week, and actually, believe it or not, I have to pick you in this matchup because you got Michael Thomas potentially coming back. You got Tyler Lockett, who's been a beast. Zeke has been pretty good. Like he's got a very high floor, and he's got the potential to put up like a week one number, which was like what 28 fantasy points or something. David Johnson actually has a really good matchup this week, and Tyler Higbee does as well, and so does Mike Davis against Arizona. So I think all of your players have decent matchups, and I don't think that while formidable as his team looks with Pat Mahomes, Aaron Jones, and Kareem Hunt, I don't think his wide receiving core is very sturdy, and his flex option is kind of mediocre in Devin Singletary.
I completely agree with you. I am also picking the Breeze Knees, even though I think Patrick Mahomes and Jones could probably put up 200 points each against me. So
they could, but I don't think they'll be able to overtake Tyler Lockett against Miami, Zeke, David Johnson against Minnesota, and that Michael Thomas man. He's pretty good. I think that Drew Brees Michael Thomas stack is going to work in your favor this week.
And Patrick Mahomes is hot last week, so he needs to cool it off this week.
Yeah, I mean, New England's defense is still pretty good. So I think that if there's anybody out there who could potentially stop Patrick Mahomes, it would be them. They know how to shut down your number one option. And I mean, they have a lot of options in Kansas City, but, if they shut down either Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce, I think they have a good shot. So – all right. Well, Adam, did you mention that you potentially had a question? Or no?
I did not have any questions right now.
You didn't have any questions. Okay.
I have one. After the first 3 weeks of the season, going into the preseason, who has been your biggest disappointment of the season, and who's been your biggest surprise?
Ooh, that's a good question. For any player?
Any player.
Well, the biggest surprise for me actually has been James Robinson. That shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody because, I drafted him as kind of like a good luck charm. And I didn't while he was going to be top of the depth chart, I didn't really think that he was going to make much of an impact on a mediocre offense, but he's been great. He's been putting up almost 30-point weeks each week. And he's been awesome. So he's been a huge surprise, I think, to everybody. As far as a biggest disappointment, probably Lamar Jackson so far. Lamar Jackson has been not anywhere close to what we saw last year, not as efficient, not as great of a passer. So unless he can turn that around, I think that we might be disappointed with the output that we get from Lamar Jackson this year. How about you?
Well, I asked the question, but I didn't take much time to think about it, though. But
I didn't have any time to think of it either.
I kind of agree with you on the surprise there for James Robinson. I think it's pretty cool that our Rockford native and fellow Rockford Lutheran kid here is exceeding at the pro level.
Yeah, it's really cool to see.
I was not expecting that, so I think he's been my biggest surprise. I kind of wish I had him. I think my biggest disappointment is another quarterback, and that's my quarterback, Drew Brees.
Yeah.
I know he's getting older, getting a bit weaker, but I thought he'd be a little more fiery this year, seeing as he was the number 2 quarterback last year.
Yeah.
After returning from his injury. So hopefully he starts to turn it around and heat it up here because I'm banking on him.
It's a possibility. I mean, I think once their offense got clicking a little bit, I mean, the Packers are, not the greatest defense ever, but Once their offense starts clicking, I think that they can, and he gets Michael Thomas back, I think he should be able to step up his game a little bit. Yeah, because Michael Thomas got hurt in week 1, like partway through week 1. So like he hasn't had Michael Thomas for two and a half of his 3 games. So I think with Michael Thomas coming back, I think you have a better opportunity to get Breeze back on track. So, yeah, well, that's all I've got. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention, Adam?
Nope, I'm all good now.
All right, man. I'm glad you were able to join me for just a little bit. For the rest of you, good luck this week. I hope that everybody loses except for me. Everybody that I need to lose, loses. All those 2-1 guys in my bracket, they all need to lose so I can be at the top of my division. I think that's what I need. So, you guys have a good week. I hope you guys have a good one and enjoy football this weekend. And I'll catch you next week. See you guys.